This is a Death Knight tier list in PvP ranking classes from very hard to easy to combat. In this tier list, classes that are further to the right are easier to go against, and the classes that are further to the left are harder in that category, starting off with all the healers. Preservation Evokers, I'm putting them in the very hard category for a Death Knight due to their high mobility paired with their snare immunities. They also barely ever cast, and when they do, it's a 30-second powerful healing spell that needs to be charged for only half a second before releasing, making it extremely hard to interrupt this class. Resto druids are also a major problem due to their ways to shapeshift chains of ice. I almost put Resto druids in the very hard section, but due to their nerfs going through January 24th, their survivability is getting a decent hit. Resto druids still have incredible healing output even while inside of CC with their use of powerful hots and defensives like Barkskin, making them incredibly hard to deal with. Holy Paladin is going to be under moderate due to a lot of the buffs that they're getting on January 24th, with their buffs to Divine Protection, Flash of Light, Holy Light, and Holy Shock. Paladins also have Freedoms, Bubbles, and Divine Steed to make it pretty rough to kill a Great One. Resto Shaman is going to be our first class underneath the easy category. One of the main reasons why is they actually have to cast compared to healers like Evoker and Druid, making Mind Freeze actually usable against them. Shamans are also highly susceptible to being cleaved with their team, as some of their defensives rely on the team huddling together, making this a great time to AoE pressure them with Death and Decay and Chill Streak or Unholy Blade. Shaman's greatest healing tool can also be one shot if you have a killing machine proc or enough runic power to death coil it down from range. Discipline Priest is going to be going under the easy category as a Death Knight due to their lack of mobility, with also a lack of a way to deal with Chains of Ice. Ripping in a Disc Priest, stunning him, and using Chains of Ice on him can be a death sentence for a team that's all stacked on their Discipline Priest. Especially if the disc is on a double melee team, which happens extremely often in solo shuffles. The Discipline Priest buffs coming January 24th will make Discipline Priest much better. I do think it will be hard to kill them through all the buffs they're getting, but they still lack ways of escaping. Holy Priests are going to be going into the easy tier list for a lot of the same reasons Discipline Priests are. First, Holy has to actually cast, unlike some of the other healers. They have a hard time dealing with Chains of Ice, denying their fear on our healer, and being susceptible to being gripped into their team and cleaved down once their cooldown to jump into the sky is over. I'm putting Mistweavers into the moderate section, as it's basically impossible to kill them in a stun setup without them being able to portal multiple times with a damage reduction. They do incredible healing output, and they aren't affected as other healers like Shamans and Priests to being displaced by Grip, because they can instantly roll back, causing almost zero interruption, unless followed by a stun. As a Frost Death Knight, I would even go as far as putting them into the hard tier list, as dealing with a disarm every pillar go if the healer isn't under crowd control can be extremely annoying. Alrighty guys, that finishes up our healing category. Now onto the DPS. Starting off with our own class, Frost Death Knight. Now, as a Death Knight fighting another Death Knight isn't really ever that scary for us, as it may be for our teammates though. Death Knights have the perfect utility to counter a fellow Death Knight with the combination of Anti-Magic Shell, Anti-Magic Zone, and Death's Advance with Icebound. Death Knights have everything they need to counter another Death Knight's burst, where it can be a problem for your teammates though, as the Death Knight's ability Death's Advance, used properly with Anti-Magic Shell, makes you unpeelable for another Death Knight to deal with. Unholy Death Knight's going to be placed one tier above Frost Death Knight in the moderate section, and the main reason why is due to how hard it is to actually kite an Unholy Death Knight's burst. Also, Unholy has a higher survivability rate than Frost does, as they can kite more freely without needing to worry about their damage, as it's mostly dots and pets. With the nerfs coming to Unholy on Tuesday, I'd imagine Unholy and Frost damage being pretty similar in 3v3s. Demon Hunter is also going to be going into the moderate section, as a lot of Death Knight's defenses are perfect for surviving a Demon Hunter's burst. Where you will have a major problem though is they are pretty hard to kite with how much mobility they have and their ability to remove your Chains of Ice. They have a strong 25% Mortal Strike effect as well, making them a problem if they are just training you very hard, as a lot of your survivability comes from self-healing through Death Strike. Devastation Evoker I'm throwing into the moderate category for a few reasons. Their ability to kite is extremely good, being immune to chains of ice for what feels like most of the match, and not to mention crowd control for 30-second intervals. They have extremely high damage, high enough to crack right through your upgraded anti-magic shell, leaving you susceptible to their 7-second root effect, which can really hurt you outside of your Wraith Wall cooldown. Devastation also has multiple schools to cast from, so kicking a cast to stop them doesn't always work. They do have low defensive capabilities, so their mobility is needed like a hunter. Balanced druids are going to be going into the easy tier list. Now this may be changed depending on how they're buffed coming January 24th. If they're overpowered, I can see them going into the moderate tier list, as fighting an extremely good LSD comp may become a problem with the damage nerfs we're receiving to the trinket bonuses and the health buffs that we're getting instead, making the meta much less bursty, favoring LSD kind of comps. But if there aren't over the top buffs, I see them going in an easy category for Death Knights, as our toolkit is very good at making a balanced druid's life very difficult. Anti-Magic Shell and Anti-Magic Zone are the perfect defenses against a balance, as well as Wraith Walk to counter a lot of the full roots he'll be relying on to defend against you. They aren't as easy for us as Frost Death Knights due to their extremely fast cyclones and ability to aid their team in tough times with off heals. Ferals will be going under the very hard category, as I feel Death Knights really lack the defensives needed to deal with a proper Feral Druid on a high pressure physical damage comp. Our only two defensives against a good Feral are Lichborn and Icebound Fortitude, and yeah, you can anti-magic shell as Thorns, but it doesn't really feel like that is helping much in a defensive side and more so an offensive side. Ferals have the perfect damage profile to really make our Death Strikes useless, as they are in a high burst class like a Subtlety Rogue, and more so a Dot Rod class, so our Death Strikes will never heal big chunks of our health, as it heals a certain amount of damage done over the last few seconds. Beastmasters are going to be placed at the low end of the moderate category, and one of the reasons why is their physical damage, so they do bypass most of a Death Knight's defensives, except for their passive armor. Beastmasteries are also usually paired with high CC physical damage classes like Ferals, Rogues, and Windwalkers, making it extremely hard to connect to a very experienced team. Due to their low defensives though, if they aren't properly crowd controlling you off the hunter while he kites you, he can easily go down. Survival I'm going to be putting into easy for right now, as they do need to be in melee range for a lot of their offensive goes, making it less of a kiting problem than a pure range class like a Marksman or a Beastmaster. They have really poor defensive cooldowns, and I also just haven't seen many since the start of Dragonflight, so it's hard to say accurately where they stand in the meta. I'm going to be putting Marksmen at the top of moderate for right now for a few reasons. They have explosive damage that feels almost unstoppable as a Death Knight besides your one stun. They have fantastic abilities to kite, making it a nightmare chasing a great Marksman, and Marksmen also play comps that make it very hard for Death Knights, typically teammates with disarms or teammates that may take a high priority over the Marksman like a Rep Paladin, making it easy for him to free cast huge damage. Even a lot of my solo shuffles, I've seen Marksmen doing absolutely amazing. I'm going to be putting Arcane Mage into the hard category, as mages are a very difficult class to completely shut down, even as a Death Knight. They have multiple schools of casting, making it easy for them to deal with your interrupts. They can blink out of your stuns, and they can also blink during a cast, making it very hard to fully shut down their crowd control on your teammates. Now, the Arcane Mage might not be the largest threat to you as a Death Knight, but he's a huge threat to your team with his consistent CC and his extremely intense burst. They also have defensive cooldowns that aren't affected by dampening effects that's prevalent this season, as it starts very quickly. I'm going to be placing Fire Mage at the very top at very hard for its abilities to survive and do burst damage with instant spells. Fire's burst inside its combust is very hard to stop since it's not dispellable anymore. Fire Mages also received a 5% damage buff to all their spells on January 24th, helping not only their burst but their sustained damage. I'm also placing Frost Mage in this very hard category, as it's extremely hard to stop all of a Frost Mage's crowd control since he has so many root effects and ways to prevent you from stopping him, like blinking out of your stuns or casting during a blink to your healer. Frost mages also, like fire, have great burst that isn't heavily casted, so they can do a lot of damage right in front of your face. I didn't think I'd be putting fire and frost so high, but fighting Venruki, Zaryu, and Rosita recently, it feels like maybe one of the hardest classes to lock down in the game played well. We're going to be placing Windwalker into the very hard category because they are a perfect counter. They have 100% parry on a short cooldown, reverse magic, dampen harm, karma, portals, roots, and disarms. Monks feel impossible to lock down, snare, or peel off your teammates. Their damage is tremendous combined with their mortal strike, and Death Knights have almost zero defensive capabilities to deal with a Windwalker besides just trying to chains and outrun him. Windwalkers are going to be your mortal enemies as a Death Knight, especially as a Frost Death Knight since they have disarm. Now for Retribution Paladins, we're going to be throwing them underneath the moderate category. There's a few reasons why. They do have a way to deal with your chains of ice once in a while with freedoms, as well as they do have an extremely potent kit to help out their teammates, making it a nightmare to fight some ret comps, like Warrior Ret or Ret Hunter. One of the things that could reduce Ret down to the easy category is the update on January 24th that will be nerfing their larger damaging moves and instead buffing their smaller moves, increasing their sustained damage but hurting their overall burst. This could make Ret a lot easier to deal with, making them only a threat during periods of great crowd control, but we will have to see what happens on Tuesday. Right now, Shadow Priests are incredibly strong. I'm going to be putting them into the hard category. It's very easy to have 100% uptime on them, as well as it's easy to survive a Shadow Priest as a Death Knight. We can also counter a lot of his defensive abilities like Volley with our anti-magic shell, or just avoiding it altogether. We also have Lichborn for their fears and an easy way to deal with Siphene. What we can't do is stop a Shadow Priest from completely crowd controlling our healer with his instant long range crowd control effects like Psychic Horror, and blowing up your team with his instant damaging abilities. Since they can't kite well, they can do most of their damaging kit without even needing to cast. Assassination Rogue is going to be going right behind Shadow Priest because they are so potent this season, as well as being hard for a Death Knight to completely stop them from doing what they want. Rogues don't have many ways to get out of Chains of Ice like a Feral does, but they do have incredible bleed damage. During a Rogue's full go, he can also use his Cloak of Shadows to completely stop you from being able to chains him. He can also use his PvP talent to make his sprint a snare immunity as well, giving him really high uptime on your teammates. Unlike an Assassin Rogue, Combat Rogues are possible to peel, as they need high uptime on the target to actually dish out their damage. They have very high mobility with Sprint, Cloak of Shadows, Shadow Step, Grapple, Blade Rush, and Killing Spree with Vanish, making it incredibly hard to actually lock them down. And if you're a Frost Death Knight, they also have Disarm on the same cooldown as your Pillar of Frost, making it a nightmare to deal with. Subtlety is going to be going right behind Assassination Rogue in hard tier. Now if we're talking about soul shuffles, I'd put them in moderate, but in a 3v3 corded situation, they're terrors to deal with. You may feel like you're snaring them really well and keeping them off your teammates for a while, but Subtlety Rogues don't care about having 100% uptime on a person like a Death Knight relies on. They can dish out unstoppable burst damage to anyone they want using Duel. Now Elemental Shamans are going to be going at the higher end of the moderate difficulty. Although they can't get chains off them, they have a viable way of dealing with it by using Ghost Wolf and kiting. Not only this, but Elemental Shamans, just like Shadow Priests, are able to adapt well to being trained by multiple melee, by relying on instant casts and procs to dish out damage no matter how many people are training him. In the right situation, it can be easy to take down a shaman since he has low defensive cooldowns, but kiting well and being aware can make that extremely hard, especially with a warlock or a warrior. Enhancement shamans are going to be going underneath the easy tier list. They're extremely squishy for us Death Knights, and all of our defensives are perfect at stopping his burst on us as well as our teammates with anti-magic zone. He also is prone to being sit on with chains all game. He doesn't have any way to deal with this. Not only this, but shamans are very prone to dying very early on with high enough pressure. A lot of Enhancement's tools are to help him and his teammates against casters, and he doesn't have many melee defenses. Affliction would have been in the moderate section, but due to their changes happening on January 24th, The meta will be shifting in a heavily Affliction favored way. The trinket nerfs to the main stat bonuses and the buff to the health the trinkets give is going to really help slow the meta down, on top of the overall burst nerfs most classes are getting in PvP this week. With this new upcoming meta, we can see Affliction Warlocks flourish as he's not worrying about large bursts and can play his game to slow everything down to a crawl. Affliction locks sustain damage with their ability to kite very well, even making themselves immune to Chains of Ice after using their portal brings them into hard. Premonition also helps out Affliction very well, being trained by multiple melee, making it hard to stop a cast if the lock is able to juke interrupts well. This stops you from being able to even stun him after an interrupt. Destruction Warlocks are going to be going into the hard category right behind Shadow Priests. Destruction Warlocks had a lot of their class counters nerfed recently, like Demon Hunters from last patch and Death Knights in this newest one, putting them in the perfect spot to excel right now. Death Knights are going to have a hard time against Great Destruction Warlocks with how badly Spell Warden was just nerfed. With Premonition on them as well, just like Affliction, it will make it really hard to completely shut down a Great Destruction that's on top of his game. If he jukes anyone, he's going to free cast right in front of your team's face, with the only way being able to stop it is displacing him with a death grip. Our strong defensives like Anti-Magic Shield and Anti-Magic Zone will help mitigate them from being very hard, as they don't have much mobility as a mage to freely move out your zone. Arms Warriors are going to be put at the very beginning of the hard difficulty. They feel like a great counter to Death Knights in many situations. Yes, in 2s it's pretty easy to kite an Arms Warrior as a Death Knight if you know how close to stay so he can't charge you again, but in 3s with so much going on and so much more aid from his teammates like a Rep Paladin, an Arms Warrior can be incredibly painful as a Death Knight, especially as a Frost Death Knight since he can disarm every one of your pillar goes, even saving his trinket for it. Arms is also getting a massive buff coming January 24th, so they will be incredibly strong right now. It can even be a pain in the ass to peel them off your teammates. No matter how many times you grip them, they seem to be able to always get back. The only way to really peel them from your teammates is using Chains of Ice and the pillar as well. I'm going to be putting Fury at the very end of the moderate section, and one of the reasons why Arms is better than Fury is because of how powerful the Mortal Strike effect is for Arms Warriors over Fury. A lot of what I said about Arms can also be said about Fury with the disarms and high mobility, but Arms seems to be better overall with how great they are at reducing healing. Demonology Warlock is going to be put at the very end of the hard tier list due to the passive damage reduction they have with their pet, and it's not affected by dampening. They also have insane burst damage that does take a bit of ramp up, but once it's ready, heavy crowd control and cooldowns are needed to survive this. Death Knights luckily do have great defenses against them, but still can die easily to such high physical and magical damage from their pets. If you enjoyed, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. If you have anything you disagreed with, please share in the comments down below. If you have any questions, I answer them live over at twitch.tv/jokestv. I try to stream daily, starting around 3 p.m. Eastern Time Zone. I'll see you over there, guys.